All right, so I'm going to break down the gist of how my Jessie J show file is built. We're going to split this up into a bunch of episodes. Each episode will cover a different kind of function. Maybe a group of inputs like drums, bass, guitar, whatever. Maybe effects processing. But this episode here, I guess, we're going to go over the layout of the desk and how the input list is laid out. Figured we'd start at the bottom and then we'd kind of get to the complicated stuff. So on the screen you should be able to see my patch bay. The input list here is laid out in order of the physical input patch. So it goes kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom. Kick, snare bottom, we can talk about this later, but it's just a duplicate patch of snare bottom that I use for kick drum. Then we got snare 2 top, snare 2 bottom, tom 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 and 4 are actually both floor toms. I don't know why I labeled this T3 as opposed to FT3, but as we go through this whole exercise, you will realize that I am relearning this file as well. This is a file I've built over years and have been using for a long time. So some of the things we're going to hit here, I'm going to be in discovery mode as well. After that, we have hat, then snare 2 trigger. Let me come back to that in a minute. Then overhead. Snare 2 trigger, we ended up adding into a hole that was supposed to be for ride. So it was going to be hat, ride, over. We ended up deciding we didn't really need the ride mic. And I wanted a snare 2 trigger, which kind of came along the lines later. And to keep it in the drum input box, we put it into the empty hole there rather than tacking it on at the end or sliding everything over. Sliding everything over was going to be complicated because I'd have to repatch my whole file. Monitors would have to repatch their whole file. And we'd have to potentially rebuild looms, all sorts of complicated things. So instead we just stuck it in the open hole that was there. Below that you'll see kick trigger, snare trigger, followed by kick sample, snare sample, and SPD. Now for some clarity of what's going on there, the triggers are actually the trigger itself going into a DI and then feeding to me. I don't believe Monitors was using this. The sample is an output from the SPD that actually has a sound. It's a different sound per song. Most of them are, electronic drum sounds, and it's because Jess's gig has a lot of electronic drums on the album. So we were trying to find a way to blend the electronic drum sounds with live, high-energy, real drums. So kick sample is actually the SPD output. Kick trigger is the same trigger that's triggering the SPD itself. It's just being picked off to a DI before it even gets the SPD. So I have an actual trigger signal there. And then kick sample is the output of the SPD itself. Same for snare. Snare trigger is being picked off before it even hits the SPD, so it hits a DI, comes to me as a raw trigger sound, and then that raw trigger also hits the SPD, which then spits out a snare sample sound. SPD left-right is actual sounds from the pad itself that the drummer hits individually. After that, we've got bass DI, bass sub, and bass synth. So bass DI and bass sub are actually the same input, I just use them differently. So you'll see here the patch point is actually the same. Bass synth, realistically, does it have to be a stereo channel? No, but I think at the time when we were building this whole thing, we were unsure whether or not it was going to be a stereo bass synth, because maybe he would have ended up playing some keys parts, maybe not. Ended up that he wasn't, so you can see it's a single patch. And yeah, pretty straightforward. Bass rig, ignore me. All right, talk back to JJ, talk back to band. This is so that the drummer, this is actually coming from drum world, not from bass world, so that the drummer can speak to Jess or speak to the band. And he's got a little ABY switcher pedal so that he can choose who he's speaking to, and then an on-off so that he can also turn on and off the talkback. Followed by keyboards, RD2000, key top and key side. I think I think I had this labeled wrong for like months. I think key top was labeled RD2000 or something like that, but it was actually key bottom. So key top and side are just two more keyboards, and for some reason I never ended up actually naming what it was here, because from my perspective, 100 and some feet away, looking at the stage, it's easier to go, oh, he's playing the top one, cool, I'm singing on the right thing. Oh, he's playing the side one, I can see that. So I didn't really need to write down what the keys were. Guitar electric, it is stereo input from Kemper. Then we've got percussion tracks, fill tracks, lead tracks, BV tracks. I see these as appropriately labeled and obvious, but percussion tracks, obviously percussion. Fill tracks are things like pads, stuff that's just kind of in the background, filling in space. Lead tracks, it's not vocal. That is instrumental leads, like maybe a kind of keyboard part that is kind of big, or strings that are actually important to be a major part of the sound of a song versus strings that are just kind of tucked into the background. So we split out the things that were important for kind of getting the message of the song across into the lead tracks portion, and then the stuff that's just sitting in the background in the fill tracks portion. BV tracks is pretty obvious. It's background vocals. One cool thing on the Jess gig is that she goes in and re-records all the BV tracks. So there's nothing off the album. This is all brand new, fresh, and it's pretty cool because she's like smashingly good at her BV tracks. And also, you know, the tonality of it and all that matches up immaculately with her live vocal. They line up so well because she's recorded the BVs and then she's of course singing over. That's followed by Click JJ, Click Band, Subtracks, LTC. Click JJ is really just maybe count-ins at the start of a song or something, saying name of the song and 1, 2, 3, 4. But it also might have a couple things where maybe there's a long break in the middle of a song. She might get a separate count-in that is, you know, breakdown 1, 2, 3, 4 or something like that, and it drops in just so she knows where she is there. Whereas the band click is basically just a metronome going the whole time. Subtracks, this is things like 808 hits, sub bass, that kind of stuff. It's just on a separate track, so I can manage it separately from things like fill and lead and such. LTC, it's time code. I receive it here. I also feed it to lighting, potentially feed it to video if there's video front of house, and I also use it to trigger my snapshots and such. After that, we've got Jess, spare, guest A, guest B. So Jess has, of course, her wireless main, and then there's a wireless spare, and then there are two guest mics, guest A and B. Most shows, some guest is pulled out of the audience and comes on stage and will sing with her or something like that. If not that, sometimes guest artists from the show also get invited up. So we basically keep an A and B, mostly because we want an A and a spare, but every once in a while there'll be a scenario where there's a guest singer, and then let's say she pulls someone out of the crowd, they come up on stage, and then their best friend is also maybe in the crowd and also sings or something. They might pull them up as well, so we'll end up with guest A and B out, and Jess's vocal. Followed by talkback from playback, talkback front of house, talkback monitors. Everything else here is effects. So if you look at this patch, though, you will see it is linear all the way across. And the reason I have this laid out this way, if you look at this inputs, this is laid out exactly as the patch is, exactly. Mostly so that if we need to go through things one at a time, they are all in direct order, one after another. So it's pretty easy to see, where things are. If there was something wrong in the patch, it would be very easy visually to see here. And, I can obviously see all my double patchy bits and stuff like that. So if a patch change had to happen, it would be really obvious that it had to happen because the patch point might be well out of this order. So that's how my actual inputs on the desk are laid out. They are laid out in that manner that matches the patch. So let's move past the inputs themselves and let's go to the layouts. So I have what I call a main layout. This layout gets recalled for every single song in the set. each song has a different version of this layout. So if it's a song that has, I don't know, an acoustic guitar, there might be an acoustic fader in here. If it's a song that has, I don't know, tons and tons of toms, I might have the toms actually laid out. If it's a song that has no snare 1 and snare 2 only, I might have snare 1 not even on this layout and muted. So as I go through snapshots, this layout here will change. The last 3 faders on this layout, though, are Jess's main vocal, a full band VCA, and effects VCA. Those are on every layout, and they are also saved there. So as I go through various layouts, those 3 stay at the end. The other layouts I have that are super useful are what I call the line check layout. So this one is my drum riser. On this layout is everything that is on the drum riser. So every drum input, followed by the drum groups, followed by drum VCAs. So if I've got a tech up on stage, or even my drummer, and he's on the drum riser, and I know we're trying to check lines or something like that, or just check sounds in general, if I pop to this, I have everything that's in front of him, shows up in front of me, including the paths they go through, like the groups and the VCAs. I have stage right, which has got bass inputs, including like the duplicate inputs, which we'll get to in a later episode, bass group, bass VCAs. Stage left, it's got all my keyboards, it's got my keys VCA, it's got my guitars, it's got my guitar VCAs. I've got playback. I have this laid out in the middle of the desk only just because that's convenient. It's all the playbacks plus playback VCA. I have one called utility. It's all the talkbacks plus iPod, oscillator. I have a separate input called play and another one called loopback. Those are so that I can listen to yesterday's mix straight back into the console over AVB. And they bypass any master bus processing. Play is if I'm playing iPod over AVB. Loopback is if I'm playing the mix over AVB. They're not really that different. It's just that play might have some EQ on it, and loopback never will have EQ on it. This layout also has guest A and B. It's utility. It's possible that guest A and B might get used for announcements or something like that. Layout 7 for me is vocal plus effects. So right in the middle, I've got Jess and Spare. I have the 3 vocal groups that she goes to. I have the VCA for the vocal, and that VCA is actually affecting the inputs going to the group. So I actually have it laid out so it's inputs, then the VCA, then the groups, kind of in order of the signal flow. On the left side of the desk, there are all the aux sends that go to her effect. The right side of the desk is all the aux returns that come back from her effects. And as I said before, the effects VCA is on the end anyways. And then I've got a layout for outputs. And these are all the matrices that feed PA, feed recorders, that kind of thing. But then I also have in this layout basically a duplicate of the utilities layout that's got loopback, iPod, play, oscillator, all the talkbacks, and a smart feed. That kind of covers my layouts.